want to introduce the author and our guest today, which is Katherine Kovacic. And she is the author of Portrait of Molly Dean and her newest book, which is known as Kill Yours, Kill Mine, which came out in November, but also known as Seven Sisters. So please welcome Katherine. Katherine, thank you
Hi,
for being here.
hi, Kendall. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you.
I'm really excited to have you here. I'm just curious, can you tell the listeners about your book, Kill Yours, Kill Mine, and the two titles and two covers that it has?
Mhm. Okay, so it came out in Australia, which is where I am, in 2023, early 2023, with the title Seven Sisters and a cover, the sort of the moody, like night lit street kind of thing.
Beautiful, with like the
It's a
beautiful
great
sky.
cover. Yeah, it's a really good cover. And then when we were talking about the American edition, which came out, as you said, last year in November, through Poison Pen Press, and when they took the US rights to it, we're having this discussion about the title and the cover, and they're like, do you mind if we change the title? I'm like, well, you guys know your market, if you want to. They said, well, we're going to do focus groups. So they did groups, and they had, and Seven Sisters and Kill Yours, Kill Mine were their top two titles. And in the end, we just decided that Kill Yours, Kill Mine, it tells you exactly what the book's about. And that was actually, it was a tagline on the original Seven Sisters. So at the end of the blurb, it said, I'll kill yours if you'll kill mine. Amazing cover. That cover just pops in America.
It does.
It's really interesting. I think, everyone buys books online, but I think it's a really huge thing in America. So I think there's that shelf appeal, which is like Seven Sisters, you walk into a bookshop and you see that. But I think you also got to think now about like the 1-inch thumbnail appeal if someone's just scrolling through crime titles on Barnes and Noble or Amazon. And I think that's the Kill Yours, Kill Mine thing, that's the one that's just going to hit you in the face as it's rolling past on your screen. So it's both amazing covers. I'm very lucky to have all these creative people in the background just coming up with these banging ideas. And the interesting thing was that there were, I was worried there's a few little phrases and things that are quite Australian. And when we were talking about what words that we need to change in there, and like someone has fish and chips, like, do you need to like change that like to fries? And they're like, no, we want that to be Australian. But then we had this thing with a caravan, and we call this thing like an annex, which is if you have a canvas room, we call it an annex. And I was getting these editorial notes from everyone. It's like, I don't even know what this is. What it sounds like it's a space attached to the side of the caravan, but what is it? So we had to kind of figure out that it was like an awning room or a screen room, and because none of the people there are caravan-y people, so they're just like, we don't go camping. We don't know what this is. So, but of all the words, it kind of blew my mind that the canvas room on a caravan was the one that got us all.
Which is so funny because I think I really love those little pieces that obviously show you where the story is taking place. And like, for example, even just watching TV, like I love British or UK like crime shows. We were kind of talking about Bad Sisters earlier. And so I loved the language in the pieces. Now, can you tell the listeners the synopsis of Kill Yours, Kill Mine?
Oh, okay. Well, Mia is a therapist, but she's a very different sort of therapist. She collects, I guess we could call them broken women, and she's brought them together in a therapy group. It's a small group, and she has a bigger plan, but there's one piece missing. And then along comes her latest client, Naomi, and she invites Naomi to join this group. And Naomi is the missing piece, because all these women are grieving, and they're all very angry because they've all lost a sister to domestic violence. And in all cases, the perpetrators have either gotten away with it completely or gotten a very light sentence or slap on the wrist sort of punishment. So these are pretty angry women. And Mia's plan is to approach therapy in a very different way by taking out the original perpetrators through a series of crisscross murders, a la Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. So while the woman with a connection to any particular case can have a very strong alibi, be sitting in the window seat of a restaurant somewhere, two people completely unconnected with anything will be taking out that man in a way to make it look like an accident, of course, because, we don't want to have this. And basically we're off from there. So,
yeah. And so where did this idea come from, and what sort of research went into it, especially when you're dealing with such a serious topic? And you're also, I'll say for the listeners, we obviously don't do spoilers on this podcast, but I'll say that you know, even as you're writing these scenes that contain violence, there is like, there's moment of heartbreak, there's moments of sadness, there's moments of, you know, um, revenge, but there's also like moments of, I don't even want to say comedy, but there's like moments of comedy between these women as well, and this camaraderie that they're like building with one another. How do you balance that as well? I threw like too many questions at you all at once. So where did the idea come from first?
Okay, we'll start with that. I guess the seed of an idea, I wrote a short story a number of years ago that did very well in the Australian Crime Writers competition. And it was, that story was kind of like, I knew even then the character had a much bigger backstory than you could deal with in 5,000 words. There was a lot more going on. So I had this kind of little nugget, and it just sat in the back of my brain. I thought, I've got to, got to do more with her. But I didn't sort of quite, see where it was going to expand. I just knew there was more because of her. And so I was sort of doing some research for something completely different. I was actually, we'll talk about this later, but a historical sort of thing about astronomy.
Oh,
and so yeah, I know, weird. This is, so welcome to my brain. This is going to get a bit weird, and then we'll get sane again. So I was astronomy in sort of like the 1800s, and I was also looking at the overlap between myth and astronomy. And so I was rereading the Greek myth of the Pleiades, which is, star cluster, which is part of the Taurus constellation. And that was kind of like, it was an odd kind of click for the whole story fitting together. Because the Pleiades, the nickname, the Greek myth of the Pleiades, tells the story of 7 sisters. So that's the nickname for the star cluster as well.
Got it.
And the sisters were fleeing, to put it delicately, the unwanted attentions, read what you need to into that, of the giant Orion. And so to save them, Zeus turned them all into stars. So basically he killed them all to keep them safe, which is, women taking the hit again. And of course, then Orion subsequently became a star constellation. And so he continues to chase those women across the sky for all eternity, which is a really depressing thought. Yeah.
Yep.
And then I found out, back into the astronomy side of it, that a version of this story occurs across all these different cultures, not just in Europe, but in Japan, other parts of Asia, First Nations Australia, and Africa. So it's a really, really ancient story. It's like, it has to be over 100,000 years old. And the reason they know that is because today we can only see 6 of those 7 stars, but 100,000 years ago you could see the 7. And the different cultures have come up with different ways to explain why you can't see the 7th sister. Either she's, she's already dead, or she's so frightened she's hiding her head, all sorts of interesting things like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but so it's this idea that, you can only see the 6 stars, but that missing 7th sister is really sort of interesting. But the other thing about this star cluster is that there's actually 800 or more stars back there that we can't see. So we can only see these 6 on top. So the idea of this being all this hidden depths and just these few in the front is all we can see was also really interesting. And so if you look up at these star clusters, you can see Orion, you can see the Pleiades, and you can see that the Orion is definitely hunting that little group. But you can't kind of tell which direction that group's pointing in. And so I thought, well, what if they're not actually running away anymore? What if they've actually stopped and turned and they're going to fight back? And so this idea of a small group of women fighting back on behalf of all these hidden women that you can't see was kind of that extra little nugget that just sort of gave me the gist of the story. And I mean, there's absolutely no Greek mythology in For Yours Kill Mine, I have to say that. But it was just a little kind of kickoff point that sort of made everything sit together. A group of women just fighting back against men. So crazy brain, sorry about that. But yeah, that was sort of the kickoff point for the whole story.
But that's so interesting that is what kind of kicked it off. And it's what a different, or like, I wouldn't even say it's a retelling, right? But it's just like a way of taking that piece of history and culture and kind of putting it into another story that's very real and rooted in reality. And speaking of rooted in reality, these are very real and very serious issues that you're tackling with talking about domestic violence and then murder. And so how did you research this, and then just the topic of domestic violence and portraying this in this book? And then also, how did you research all the different types of murders that your characters would have to commit, and like how they, it has to really, work well with the victim that they're targeting, which you see there's so many different ways, right? So how did that come about?
So I guess we'll start with the domestic violence side. That's sort of something that's been on my radar, and it's hard to tackle that in a crime book. First of all, I guess because we always know who done it, so there's no mystery in that. But also, it's a topic that people, it's hard one for people to deal with. It's hard to read about. It's hard to, because we know how real it is. A lot of crime we consider, you're reading fiction, but domestic violence is very real.
Yeah.
In Australia, I think we've had almost 2 women a week killed, and I think in the US it's 3 women a day is the statistic for women murdered by a current or former partner. And it's just shocking. I mean, it's a major epidemic that we don't look at. So in Kill Yours, Kill Mine, the domestic violence is there, but it's in the background. It's not sort of overt. So that sort of that was my way of letting readers into that without actually forcing them to look at the really, really harsh reality of it. So it's there, it's in the background. And I did a lot of research on the way women, on what happens when they try and get out of relationships. That's the particularly dangerous time. And on the penalties, women who have fought back and injured or killed the man because that seems to be the only way out, or because they're literally fighting for their lives. And the number of women who end up in jail for long periods on lengthy charges because none of that background is taken into account. It's just staggering, And of course, the fact that many of these men do get, they get a slap on the wrist, they're out, and we know that they don't, they're not going to move on to their next partner, and it's all going to be sweetness and light within the next relationship. They're going to do it again and again. So that was part of the idea of taking out these perpetrators, was that it's not just revenge for the sisters, it's stopping them from doing it again too. So it's getting very heavy now, but so it's an important topic though, and it's so it's there in the background, but it's not too hard and heavy in the book. I think that you can't you can't work with it, and we're from the point of view of the sisters, so we see it through their lens with that, when we see it with that sort of anger and reflection. And then we're usually moving on to plotting how to sort that out.
I was just gonna say, it's, as a reader and as a woman, there's so much violence against women in so many different forms, and it's just all too common. And I will say, as a reader, like you said, the domestic violence aspect kind of takes a backseat to these women, their stories, their relationships with one another, and then obviously committing these crimes. And I think you did a very good job of making each woman very individual, each story individual, each personality very individual, and kind of gave someone that many, if not all, women could relate to in some way. And you also made space for, I felt as a reader, for me to participate in it, if that makes sense. Like I watched it, I wasn't watching it from Mia, who is the therapist's point of view, as much as I was watching it as one of the women in the group and feeling their anticipation, or feeling their fear or their regret or their, anger for like revenge, and thinking like, yeah, of course, let's do this. Why wouldn't we? And I just think it was a great way to read that story and like feel that on another level. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. That's really lovely to hear you say that. I really appreciate that. And I think it was, I was worried about it when I first started doing it, about having the big cast, because you don't want too much of their backgrounds, because you don't want to get bogged down in it, but you need enough to know who they are and who you're traveling with as part of the story. So I'm glad that that worked for you.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So a lot goes on in my brain. It's I guess I used to be a veterinarian a long, long time ago, so I have a very high gore tolerance. So when I'm researching stuff, I'm quite happy to read all the scientific papers about, what happens when you put a body in water and it stays there for 2 weeks, and what does it look like, and will you still detect the drugs there, and here are the pictures. But I guess I have a bit of a crazy brain. But the important thing about these women was that they're all normal women. So no one has like crazy wild ninja skills, or, are suddenly going to morph into like the female version of James Bond and be, going across Sydney Harbour, having hot light a boat at midnight and shooting back, with one hand while they're piloting the boat. It doesn't work like that. They're average people, so they have to come up with average ways, normal ways to kill people. Ways that are easy to achieve without an extensive arsenal or ninja skills. And of course, we have quite strict gun laws. Really good. I think we had one prime minister who we had a massacre at Port Arthur, and he just went, right, that's it, no automatic weapons, nothing, and got rid of it all. And so, obviously there's always going to be illegal guns with gangs and things like that, but by and large, you know, the average person in the street cannot get their hands on a gun.
Yeah.
So, and of course, in terms of the story, shooting, you know, murder. No, we don't want
that takes out a big, like,
that's, yeah.
I'm thinking of even the game Clue, like that takes out a big piece of a weapon is, you know, so you have to find something else in a creative way that is realistic.
Yeah. But I mean, the other thing here is, of course, we wanted it all to look like accidents or possible accidents anyway. So guns were never really going to be a big part of it.
Now, I want to segue into a little bit more about you as a person. So how did you get into writing? Because you talked about the fact that you were a veterinarian for a while, was writing something you kind of always loved and did, and then it eventually became a part of like your career. Or how did that happen?
Yeah, I think we're all those people who always loved English and things at school, but, you know, get streamed into science and those things, which is great. I enjoyed veterinary medicine too, but I suppose as a vet, and I practiced for probably about 4 or 5 years, and as an almost new graduate, that was the first thing that I wrote that ever got any major attention. It was called The Dietary Management of Gastrointestinal Disease in Small Animals. So
very different.
Small, very different, very small audience, very well received though. But not a lot of money in that one.
Honestly, my cat, she takes a probiotic. She has stomach issues. I would love that for her.
There you go. There you go. So I'd been in practice for a few years, and it was going to be like 6 months off to work in the family business, which is something completely unrelated, because my brother and I had always, you know, school holidays growing up, you always help out in the family business, you do that sort of stuff. And at that stage, mum and dad, well, they were going to expand. They were putting in a manager. I'm like, yeah, I know it back to front. I'll come and do it. Then you don't have to worry about it. And so like 6 months became 3 years, and which was really good, because I got to hang out with my dad properly for 3 years, which was lovely. But during that time, I thought, you know, I'm gonna like do just 1 or 2 subjects at university that I never got to do when I was doing all the science. I'm going to go and do a couple of like art things. And so I did these like at night thing, and I was like, my personality type, you know, while I'm just sitting here listening to these things, I may as well get the credit for it, sign up properly. So basically, while I was not doing veterinary medicine and while I was working full-time in the family business, I ended up doing an art history master's and then a PhD. And
that's not like a little accomplishment either. That's not like, oh, I'm going to take a few classes. That's a huge accomplishment. Congrats.
Well, you know, it's just, as I said, it's just like, come like, well, I'm here, I may as well get the credit for it. You know, what's the point of just sitting here auditing the class? So, and so I had this, like, you know, I had my timetable for work day and then chunks of time for research and writing and for the PhD. And part of that, I think that was part of when I realized how much I enjoyed writing and researching again, you know, getting to do that. But then when I got those degrees and I still had that chunk of time left, and I thought, oh, I don't want to lose this space. So I signed up for a writing a novel thing with Fable publishing, and I had the seed of The Portrait of Molly Dean in my head. And so that was kind of what got me into writing there, and writing crime fiction rather than something academic.
Wow. And are you working on something now?
I am. I'm holding the idea very loosely. So I've got this, it's a bit of a wild and crazy idea. So I'm kind of like, I'm not writing the story, but I'm writing random bits about the characters and the world, and that's like yielding bits about, you know, how certain things are going to happen and how people are going to die. And then of course I have to go off and research if I can actually kill someone that way, will it be plausible? So yeah, so just sort of building the world and finding the threads of the story. And I think another couple of weeks, I think, and I'm going to kick off with the actual story. So
are you a big planner and like plotter, or do you kind of, how does an idea come to you, or how do you start?
Often I get characters first of all. So I get a character who just sort of has a nugget of a story to tell. So I have one manuscript that's kind of off doing something with my agent at the moment, and I had this character in my head for a long time that was just sitting behind the wheel of the car, kind of gunning the engine and just like, come on, gotta, you know, checking the watch, gotta get going. I'm like, where are we going, what are we doing? You know, so I just get in, we're going for a drive, you'll find out on the way. And so I just have these people in my head that sometimes it feels like one of those weird, like the bad job interviews, you know, where you've got this, I've got a waiting room full of characters in my head, and every now and then I call one and say, so what can you bring to the project, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And so I think happiness is about looking at those little things and finding the joy in them, and not not thinking that you have to be over there and up there with that person or whatever. And also I think focusing on your own achievements rather than looking at other people and saying, well, you know, they've sold X thousand, or, you know, they've got that flashy car or moved into a lovely apartment. And, you know, it's about, you know, where you are in your life and what's going on. And thinking about the little things too, and not getting so focused on some mystical horizon that you think you've got to get there, because, you know, you climb the mountain, but the mountain turns out to be a foothill every single time, really, doesn't it? you climb the hills like, oh, damn it. So think about the foothill.
It
So
reminds me of
go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it reminds me of those moments as you're growing up where like you look back at those teenage years and you're like, oh, I was so like consumed by X, Y, or Z, and it really wasn't that important. Or heaven forbid, like, oh, I thought I looked so bad in that picture, and you look at it now and you're like, no, I don't.
Yeah, so, exactly that you look back and you think, oh, it was actually really good then. And why didn't I realize how good it was? Yeah, exactly that.
So what are some of the things that make you happy? The little things.
The little things. Oh, you know what? I think sometimes just coming home, whether it's at the end of a long day or a trip or whatever, and just coming home to your own environment, and my doggos are here and they're like, yeah, back, and being able to slip out in your tracksuit pants or whatever. But just being home in your little cocoon space.
Yeah.
And then, you know, things like having a hot chocolate or whatever on a cold day, or a good book, you know, when you sort of you kick off a good book, and you know when you read that first page and you just like the first pages and you're just like, this is going to be really good. And that's such a good feeling.
So what piece of advice would you give to aspiring authors or writers?
Oh, I think it's write the bad book. You've just got to write. And you know, if that ends up being the one in the drawer, so be it. But you're writing, and if you've got nothing to edit if you haven't written it in the first place. So
that's true.
Yeah, you've just got to, even if you're thinking, you know, I'm not sure about this, get on and write it, because sure, as I said, it might be the one that ends up in the drawer, but it might be the one that you can come back, or you get halfway through and you think, hang on a sec, if I change the point of view, it's all going to work beautifully. So you've got to get in there. So stick the post-it on the top of your screen that says write a bad book.
And what are you still hoping to accomplish in life?
Oh, gosh, that's a really big question. I don't know. I don't sort of have this like big horizon, big picture thing. There's a couple of places I'd like to travel to.
Okay.
And I think is that involved in potentially stories in my head, possibly. I've had I've always wanted to go to the Arctic, and I have had several tries getting there, and it's like this omen thing that I feel like if I actually get there, I'll probably die, because it goes wrong every time. So the first
seems scary.
I know. Don't get on a ship with me, folks, if you see that I'm on the manifest. So first time I got there, and this was way pre-pandemic and everything, and the ship ran aground on day one, and we had to be get taken off by the Canadian Coast Guard. And then the second time I tried, the ship that the company was using, expedition company out of America, but it was a Russian registered ship, and the Russians took the ship back at the last minute. And then the third one, which is a different company, the company went out of business at the last minute. And then the fourth time, so we're going for a fifth time.
Oh my gosh!
I know, right?
Are you? Maybe you're not supposed to go to the Arctic.
I know.
That's crazy.
That's why I said. I figure like if I actually get there,
yeah,
I'm gonna slip on a banana peel, slide off the deck, and there'll be like a narwhal there with its tongue sort of pointed up. But yeah, so fifth time, the weather was. I was up in Calgary, and we were waiting to meet the ship, and the weather turned, and so the ship couldn't actually get in close enough to put out the dinghies to take people on board. And you still have to fly up through Yellowknife, which is like top of Canada, to refuel the plane. And there were the wildfires there, and so they were busy evacuating people. And the ship company, while we're sitting here, go, no, it's going to be fine, the weather's going to turn. I'm like, have you seen the fires? Because Australia, we get a lot of bushfires.
Yeah, I was going to say,
there's no way they're going to let a passenger plane land in the middle of this to refuel and keep going. And they're like, don't worry, it'll be fine. I'm like, there's fires. And so I'm sitting in the hotel basically waiting for them to call it so that I can book my trip home, because insurance, you can't do anything until it's officially cancelled. And that was 3 days. They're going, no, it's going to be fine. It's day 3. They're like, yeah, it's not fine.
That's
So,
wild. Those are
so
all like very, I mean, you could write a book just about this woman trying to get to the Arctic. I mean, literally any, like all these random things that just kind of happen that have stopped
yep,
it. That's wild. I hope you get there one day. That seems
yeah.
like a goal I want you to achieve
So
now.
yes, but of course, if you do see in the news about Australian woman dies in the Arctic, you will know
I'll know it's
exactly
you.
who we're talking. That's right. That's right. You'll know exactly
That's
who it
funny.
is.
Katherine,
Wow.
thank you so much for being here. This was so lovely. And everybody who's listening, don't forget she'll be back for another book club episode later this week. But Katherine, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for chatting with me, Kendall. I've loved it.